Welcome back. I'm Kim Bailey. He's Jamie Wadley, and this is Inside Exec. Today we have a guest with us, Chris Clearfield, and let me introduce him to you. First of all, Chris is a leadership strategist, author, and Harvard-trained scientist who works with high-performing entrepreneurs to help them scale without becoming the bottleneck in their own business. He's coached founders and executives at small and medium enterprises and large companies, including Netflix, Microsoft, Etsy, and ExxonMobil, helping leaders navigate complexity, redesign how decisions get made, and build teams that operate with clarity, ease, and ownership. He's the co-author of Meltdown: Why Our Systems Fail and What We Can Do About It, winner of the National Business Book Award and the Thinkers 50 Strategy Award. His new book, The High Altitude Entrepreneur, is out now. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. If we get to that point, as you know, we tend to get caught up in the questions. We did send Chris some questions, but we will go on to those before we after we let him say hello. Hello, Chris.
Hey, Kim. Hey, Jamie. It's good to be here. I'm excited for our conversation.
So let's get started. The first question we sent to Chris was, are we moving to a time when leadership of teams is no longer the most important management skill we should have?
We are moving to a time where leadership of teams isn't the most important management skill, because I think actually the most important management skill is leading ourselves. Like, it's only when we're able to really lead ourselves, understand ourselves, regulate our own nervous systems, that we're able to do that effectively with our teams and with those around us.
So we've had guests over the last probably 4 or 5 years that talked very much about servant leadership and about how, as leaders, we were there to serve the rest of the team, to empower them, to give them the opportunity to move forward. Are we moving away from that area of leadership?
Well, I don't think we're moving away from servant leadership. In fact, I think we're moving closer to it, or it's becoming more important. But I think what I would suggest is that the way that we think about servant leadership needs to change a little bit. So first of all, servant leadership is not necessarily about doing things for your team, right? It's about empowering them to do things for themselves. And that really requires being able to set a rich context and really to be able to understand what are the forces that are going on behind the challenges in front of you, rather than just heading in and tackling those challenges. So that's part of it. And I think the other part of it is, just like you get that message on the airlines, you need to put your oxygen mask on before helping others. I think that's the same thing. I see so many leaders who are really just burning themselves out because they are back to back with meetings. They are the ones handling everything. They have a tremendous amount of responsibility, and that responsibility is real. The trick is, how do you hold that responsibility in a framework where you're not the hero, the victim, or the villain? How do you hold that responsibility in a pure way where you're really taking care of yourself so that you can take care of others? There's
a fair degree of acceptance of wellness programs in organizations and senior executives particularly, because we had a guest on a little while back now who was based in Singapore, and he was finding that there was a huge number of CEOs who were feeling very lonely and feeling very isolated. That led me to think about, last week we talked about communicating core values. So in the framework of what you've just said, are we looking at CEOs particularly, and that's that C-suite level, who have the opportunity, because they can seek out peer group support, because they can access wellness programs, but they still have to be transparent and clear in their communication about core values and about the targets that the organisation has to reach. Are we looking at that group of people being the ones that are most vulnerable?
Well, I think it's always such a challenge to be the CEO, such a challenge to be the founder, because you're the one that ends up carrying the weight of everything, right? And I think about, entrepreneurs who often start with themselves, $100 in their pocket or whatever. And then they build up this business. They build this business, and they make this transition from, at the beginning, where everything is really uncertain, and that's just a part of it. because they're doing something new, because they're creating something new, they're serving a new market. And then they get to a point where, they have a staff, they have a team, they have people that they're paying, they have a, payroll that they're responsible. And suddenly uncertainty goes from being something that they're friendly with and that they're embracing to something that's a real liability. And I think that amount of responsibility really can create a lot of loneliness. And I was just talking with a leader in a large corporate organization, and he was feeling emotional burnout, and we talked about his burnout. We talked about what that was, and he said, I talked to my team about this week. Like, I shared transparently with my team that this is what was happening to me, and I just said, wow, like that, it is really powerful to bring that vulnerability and to be transparent about that vulnerability, even as you are setting targets for your organization, even as you are trying to move things forward, to really also show up as a human. I think that's a tremendously skillful application of leadership. And it, unlocked that for people in his team, as he put it, kind of a few brave souls to say, hey, I'm also feeling this too. This is also really challenging for me right now.
In that sense, then, with the introduction of so much more AI into the workplace, are we going to lose that connection?
I've been thinking a lot about this, and I think actually that connection becomes more important, right? So I think, yes, the AIs are going to, we're all using it, right? Like they are making things brilliant. I mean, I have a leadership council that I go to with my issues, and they give me such good feedback. But ideas have never been the barrier, right? If you think about in any corporation, any leader that wants to make a change, right? The idea for the change, that's not the barrier. You can have the best idea in the world. The barrier for a change, or the limiting factor for a change, is a leader's ability to build and manage relationships. It is the ability to get people on board with the change that you are wanting to make. And that ability is going to become more and more important. The more ideas that are out there, the faster the pace of change goes. So I think that the relationships become even more important as things get more AI driven, more automated, and that skill becomes more valuable.
Might move on to our second question. Are CEOs and senior executives internal entrepreneurs these days?
I think CEOs and senior executives, they have the option to be internal entrepreneurs. I don't think all of them are. I think there are a lot of pressures in so many organizations to, preserve the status quo and move things forward. And I think that said, I think there is a tremendous role for CEOs and senior execs to take on that internal entrepreneur mantle. I was just talking with a woman who was the COO of a law firm, and she kind of really came into that job with a very explicit mandate for change. And she made a lot of changes very, very quickly, and she was actually able to move very fast with a lot of things. So she was really embracing that role of intrapreneur, and she was really kind of given that runway up to a point. And then at some point, the firm said, we actually don't want to change our business model beyond what it is right now. Like we don't want to, despite AI, despite the system you've set up, despite the insights we have about pricing and how to work with clients, we don't want to change our kind of core business model. And she basically said, that's okay, right? Like, I'm just not the right person for this role, if that's what you want. She was a dedicated intrapreneur, and she, was brought in for that reason, and then ended up working with a CEO or a managing partner who ultimately decided, no, actually, we want to keep things kind of as status quo for now. We don't really need to change yet, so we don't want to be in front of that. So I think there is kind of an interesting both and in that answer, right? Where like you can be that intrapreneur, and you don't have to be necessarily.
Are we looking at a time, because we've got a listening group that are just starting out their careers, should they be looking at themselves and thinking about, I want to be the change agent. I see that the business community is changing, that the scenery is going to be different when I get to the CEO level, or or I have decided that I don't want to follow this linear path of progression through what should be my career in inverted commas. Can we encourage them to think in terms of going into an organisation and being a change agent, recognising that they've got skills, that they've got thoughts, that they've got interest in the industry?
I love that question. And I love the opportunity to work with and connect with new grads, because they do have such different ideas. They do have such a different sense of taste for what they want, compared to the generation that viewed career, as you put it, as you show up and you work at the same place for, 30 years, right? And 30, 40 years. And I think we're well past that generation. And I think that as really having the boldness to go in and say, this is what I want, this is what I don't want, and then coupling that with the skills to actually really understand what the business is and add value, I think, especially with the advent of, all these AI tools, to add value in a way that's really nonlinear with your own time and effort. I think there's a lot of opportunity for people to ask for forgiveness rather than permission, and adding value is kind of one of the currencies that lets you, that grants you a lot of forgiveness.
In that sense too, though, we need to encourage them to think about their communication skills, because they've been, and we coin the phrase, digitally educated, in that the people that are interviewing them or assessing them for roles are far less likely to be comfortable with the digital nomenclature than they are. Do we need to just remind them that they have to think about how they're expressing themselves and what the changes are that they see in the future, so that it's an acceptable message that comes across the interview table?
Well, I think it's a great question. And, thinking about how to calibrate your communication. I mean, that to me goes back to the conversation we were just having about how do you strengthen your ability to be in relationship with people? Because that, to me, that is really so much of what not only makes people successful in the workplace, but makes them fulfilled in the workplace. It makes it feel like, oh, I'm working with a team around me. I've created, a context where people really have my back. It's that ability to build a relationship with somebody and be genuinely curious about, hey, am I going to be a good fit here? Like, what are you looking for? Like, can we build, in an interview context, can we build a relationship together? And I do actually think that one of my observations is that I think, at least in the US and our society, like, we've gotten we have a lot less practice recently at building strong relationships with people.
You probably should let Jamie say something.
I'm trying to take it all in, actually. I tend to see things through the lens of, the shifting sands that is what is AI and how can we use it. And I guess, when I hear you talk about the relationships and managing ourselves, I can see that's even, more important now than it's ever been. But given that everyone in a business these days is a manager of sorts, because they're either managing humans directly or they're managing a team of artificial agents, which essentially are becoming our colleagues in business. I just wonder if there's any shift in the way we're thinking that's required. I can see a time, I guess, when the nature of our workforce will be a different makeup of how many humans to how many digital agents we're working with. But is the old wisdom still the same as enough to carry us through to an unknown future, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I think that there is something that there's something that I observe that's very similar between strong leaders and people that have strong skills at working with AI. And I think that is going to be a constant, at least for the foreseeable future. And that the strength that they bring to it is the ability to give people or agents a rich context into the problem that they're trying to solve. So many, I'll just talk about the leadership lens for a moment. So many leaders, so many CEOs, senior execs, you hear over and over again, delegate, right? You need to delegate, just delegate. And I think the thing that interests me about that advice is, if it's so prevalent and if we're all hearing it all the time, then why is it so hard? What do people do instead of delegating, right? And when I put my coach hat on and I'm working with somebody, that's what I get really curious about. And it turns out that when you instead of seeing delegation as a problem to solve, when you see it as a tension to manage, when you see it as the tension between control and delegation, what you can see is that there's a lot of upsides to control, right? There's a lot of benefits to leading from a place of control. Now, there's a lot of downsides too. It's not scalable, all of these things. There's a lot of upsides to delegating. There's a lot of downsides to delegating. There's a lot of fear around it too. So when I'm working with a leader that is maybe feeling like they're in the weeds, they're taking on too much, what I'm often doing is I'm often helping them see, okay, well, what's the benefit of where you are now? Like what's the hidden benefit you get from operating in the way you're operating now? And I think, that idea and really being able to make that shift, that is a part of what makes leaders really effective at dealing with others. Like they are able to provide the rich context. They're able to provide clear conditions of satisfaction. Like, what are the goals of what you're working on? And they're able to provide clear constraints for people and clear freedoms so that people actually know, hey, here's all the space I have to move in and here's where I can't go. And that is a way of solving the tension between control and delegation, or rather designing the tension in a different way between control and delegation.
I think that's a good place to have a break in our conversation with Chris Clearfield. Join us again next week. For now, I'm Kim Bailey. He's Jamie Wadley. We're talking with Chris Clearfield about leadership in the AI generation, and this is Inside Exec.